By the time we'd finished reloading, they'd found a slightly less rock-covered hilltop that was emitting lightning. This time we had a clear view, and the lightning was obviously coming from a snaky-looking Xenos, which perfectly matched the images of zoanthropes we'd seen. Gravis and his scout did not find it amusing when Sarge asked for Twitch's opinion anyway. Luckily for everyone's nerves, Twitch was too concussed to be smug, and simply agreed that the bug looked like a bug. As our shuttle neared the hill, we realized that this drop was going to be nastier than the last. This time, instead of a free-for-all, the hill was clearly in Tyranid hands/claws/whatever. And it looked fairly critical to the local battle with the Greenskins. The Nids definitely weren't going to let us wipe out their artillery without a fight. They'd reinforced it as heavily as they could manage. Perimeter duty would not be another cakewalk, and if it took too long to subdue the Psyker, we'd be up to our asses in bugs. Sarge quickly split us into pairs, assigned us to the 3 main approaches to the hill, and convinced Twitch to share his mines with us. We'd clear the area, push out, then plant the mines and fall back towards the top if things got hairy. Before anything more complex could be put together, we reached the DZ. Sergeant Gravis was the first one down again. He leaned out the rear hatch, sighted the zoanthrope, and pretty much dropped right on top of the Psyker. The rest of us followed as quickly and professionally as we could manage. None of us even had to be pushed out of the shuttle by the scout this time. Every single one of us landed with our weapons firing. There were 7 or 8 termagants keeping the zoanthrope company, and only one of them was still alive when we hit the ground. Sarge finished that one off, and we all fanned out towards our assigned areas. We moved fast, motivated by a desire to get our choke points set up before reinforcements arrived, and to get something solid between us and Gravis's fight with the zoanthrope. Honestly, we hadn't taken the Space Marine too seriously up to that point. I mean, we respected him and found him daunting as hell, but his combat performance in the last drop hadn't been up to the stories you hear about Space Marines. His fight with the Tyranid Psyker, though, that was something you tell your grandkids about. In the few seconds we saw him fighting before we got under cover, Sergeant Gravis baited out and dodged 3 massive lightning bolts, scored twice as many hits on the Xenos' bubble shield, and generally moved with more speed and grace than should have been possible. Abstractly, we'd known that the Emperor's Scythes chapter were the best experts available when it came to fighting Tyranids, but watching Gravis play that zoanthrope like a fiddle really drove it home. We all would have stopped to spectate, if the zoanthrope's misses weren't blowing the rocks near us into red-hot shrapnel, that is. Anyway, we all got the hell off that hilltop and into position. Spot stayed up high and gave us a good view of the incoming reinforcements. As we set our mines and found the best lines of fire, we all finished our preparations just in time, and started mowing down the first wave of Tyranids as they climbed the hill. That first wave was nothing but the Gaunts, both varieties, that had been near the hill. Thanks to the wonderful nature of choke points, not to mention good firing positions and techno-heretically awesome weapons, we were able to kill them before they managed to shoot or claw us. That's not to say that we actually killed all the Tyranids. Nids don't tend to run out of bodies to throw at a problem. But we did convince them to rethink their strategy. Once the choke points were choked with their bodies for any more to get past, the Gaunts broke off to wait for heavier reinforcements. Now, we'd been in this sort of fight with Nids before. Back when we were actually in the Guard, we'd fought a memorable and debatably successful defensive battle against the bugs. So we knew what would almost certainly come next. Warriors, possibly with Ravener or Gargoyle support. On our respective sides of the hill, Amy, Nubby, and Tink all moved to elevated positions and helped Sarge watch for the higher life forms. Meanwhile, those of us still on the ground made sure the mines in our positions were ready. and Sarge checked in with Gravis and his scout. The Marines were still working on wearing down the Zoanthrope's shields without killing it, and asked us not to distract them again. We all made some rather unkind comments at that last part, but refrained from transmitting any of them. Spot the Wonder Drone tagged the second wave on its way in, and as we had guessed, there were some warriors directing the charge from behind the initial meat shield. The Guard has a standard combat doctrine for pretty much any situation. While most of these are not very individual Guardsman friendly, the one for that sort of attack is a good one. So, for once we did things by the book. Admittedly, said book is rather short, but that just means it's easy to remember. The three of us that had moved into sniper positions held our fire, and prepared to shoot the big one first. On Doc and Tank's flank, an overcharged Tau laser thingy-guided plasma bolt turned their warrior into chunky salsa. Over on Amy and Twitch's, a precision headshot from our actually quite talented markswoman took out theirs. With the Synapse creatures dead, the Gaunts lost cohesion, and both pairs of Guardsmen easily mowed them down. Unfortunately, the sniper on our third flank was Nubby, who didn't have Tank's anti-armor weaponry, or Amy's accuracy. A very angry, if rather burnt and bloody, Tyranid warrior immediately returned fire with one of those big B-gun thingies, pinning Nubby down on his sniper perch. Sarge tried to hold off the incoming wave himself, making heavy use of his grenades and the choke point, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't going to work. Sarge calmed the rest of us, and over Nubby's shrill screaming, asked if anyone could give him support before he had to blow his mines and relocate. The rest of us were still rather busy with our mop-ups, and reinforcing Sarge meant crossing the Zoanthrope-infested hilltop. So we all declined. It seemed like Sarge was going to have to give up his flank safety margin, and he was getting ready to blow his mines and pull Nubby out, when the Scout Marine told him to hold a little longer. Sarge managed it. He wound up having to use his boots to keep an especially persistent Gaunt off while he reloaded, and his armor and beefiness barely saved him from a few flesh borer hits. But he managed it. Right as things were getting downright dire, the warrior and several nearby Gaunts went down to an amazing display of precision shooting. Nubby finally got his ass out of cover and helped Sarge turn the tide back around as the scout returned to the Zoanthrope fight. Things were looking pretty good, even if we could see the third wave mustering near the bottom of the hill. Good changed to great when we heard Gravis say the Zoanthrope's shield was almost down. And then everything went to shit. Looking back, it's not that hard to spot the exact moment when the shitting of everything occurred. Actually, it wasn't that hard to spot at the time either. Within 20 seconds of it happening, we knew what had gone wrong and why. But it took a bit longer for all the horrible results of that one screw-up to manifest. Anyway, what started that whole shit show was a simple communications failure at a rather hectic moment. The third wave of Tyranids was coming in, and we were busy shooting them and getting ready to blow our mines and fall back. Up on top of the hill, Sergeant Gravis had the Zoanthrope on the ropes and was ordering his scout to get ready to trank it. The Scout Marine had just returned from helping Sarge and was perched on one of the pointy pillars on top of the hill. As the scout got the trank ready and lined up what must have been a rather tricky shot, he spotted something and calmed us. His exact words were, "Interrogator. Incoming Tyranid assault flyer. North side." Now, let's do an experiment. First, go out and find 50,000 Guardsmen. Actually, go out and get 100. It's not like Guardsmen are hard to find. Hell, we're literally the largest organized fighting force in the galaxy. Which, come to think of it, means that the definition of a standard response to anything is what we do, not what a few bloody crazies stomping around in power armor and getting eaten by bugs. Anyway. Ask any of these guardsmen what they'll do when someone warns them hostile air units are incoming. Nothing else, no details or orders, just hostile air incoming. You know what they'll say? It'll be the same regardless of regiment, specialization, rank, or anything. Every single one of them will tell you the same thing. They will get the hell into cover. Apparently, the Emperor's Scythes chapter of the Space Marines aren't on the same page as the rest of us, though. Or at least that Scout Marine wasn't. I mean, if he'd just been a little more clear, if he'd added a few more bloody words like take it out, or cover me, or even if he'd just shortened it to incoming assault, we would have understood. But no. He told us there was a flyer incoming, and stood there with his ass hanging out, wrongly believing that we'd shoot it down while he lined up his shot on the zoanthrope. Nubby was the first one to notice the impending disaster. Well, actually, he just saw the scout standing there and told Starge that the stupid bastard's gonna get his ass shot off. Sarge stared for a second, then peeked out of cover and saw what sort of flyer was incoming. Everything started to click together. The incoming Tyranid wasn't some dedicated air bioform designed to strafe or bomb ground targets. It was the biggest, meanest melee monstrosity in the swarm. Or at least, the biggest one that was still capable of flight. It was a flyrant. A winged hive tyrant. The Tyranid equivalent of a Lord General crossed with a main battle tank and with some wings strapped on for good measure. It was big, pissed, and coming right at the only member of our team that was standing out in the open. Unfortunately, Sarge was just a little too late. By the time he'd started shouting his warning, nearly 5 tons of flying Tyranid hit the Scout Marine in the back. You know how in cartoons a bus or train hits someone and they'll just sort of vanish? It was exactly like that. Right down to how the poor bastard's sniper rifle was left pinwheeling in the air for a second. In the aftermath, 3 things became apparent. The scout had not gotten his shot off. The physically exhausted zoanthrope was doing a runner, and Gravis had bigger problems than chasing it. The Space Marine told us that the zoanthrope was fleeing towards Sarge, asked us to catch it, and then started shouting about some place called Sotha. A second later, the tyrant let out a scream that shook the entire hilltop. The situation was bad, but it was also, thank the Emperor, relatively simple. We had a perimeter to maintain, a hive tyrant to survive, and a zoanthrope to catch. Sarge started bellowing out orders, and the rest of us scrambled to follow them. Since we still had all of our mines in place, the perimeter was actually the least pressing issue. Sarge's first order was to fall back towards the top of the hill and let the explosives hold off the smaller Tyranids for a while. Sarge then told us he was going after the zoanthrope, and sent Nubby to get the scout's tranq-loaded sniper rifle. For the rest of us, Sarge's final orders were a little more free-form. Tink was to get his drone on the hive tyrant, and the rest of us were told to handle it. Seriously, that was his entire master plan. By the Emperor, there's a bloody hive tyrant inside our perimeter. It's killed 1 Space Marine, and as soon as it finishes off the other, it'll kill us all. What should we do, sir? Handle it! He never managed to live that one down. The ridiculousness of that order aside, it's not like we actually needed one. Each of us knew that the only way we'd live through this was if the tyrant was dead, forced to retreat, or kept distracted long enough for us to call and board the shuttle. All 3 of these possible solutions could be accomplished in the same way, by shooting the big bug and running away if it chased us. Some variations in improv could be thrown in as things progressed, but shoot and run was really the core strategy. Even the Space Marine was doing it, though it was more stab and run in his case. The first of us to actually see the Hive Tyrant up close were Amy and Twitch. As they ran up towards the hilltop, Sergeant Gravis started coming down in these big graceful leaps made possible by his grav chute. Valiant heroes of the Imperium that both of them were, they immediately scrambled to find hiding places. As the massive Tyranid charged down after Gravis, both of them held their fire, not to mention their breaths, and observed what they could. The Flyrant was, of course, a winged bipedal bug that stood 6 meters tall and was made of distilled murder and hate. But it also had a few important distinguishing points. It had 4 arms, well, 3-ish after Gravis had gotten its attention. The top 1.5 ended in the usual Tyranid talons. The bottom pair held a massive bone sword and one of those freaky sentient whip things. Each of those weapons was capable of messily killing any poor guardsman that got in close, but none of them had real range. That was a very good thing for us. Not so much for Gravis, though. Speaking of Sergeant Gravis, he was coming down the hill fast, but the Flyrant was gaining and he didn't have much room left to run before he hit Twitch and Amy's minefield. Right as it looked like he was going to try jumping over it and then wading through the incoming wave of nids, he suddenly reversed direction. All 3 of the Flyrant's attacks missed the Space Marine as, with more speed and agility than anyone wearing the equivalent of a light tank should have, he dodged between the beast's legs. It was impressive as hell, especially the part where he got in a whack with his power sword on his way through. Both Amy and Twitch watched appreciatively until they realized the Flyrant wasn't going to be able to stop. The 4.9-ton Tyranid flailed its wings in a mad attempt to get airborne, completely failed to do so, and plowed through over a dozen AP mines. Twitch and Amy barely made it to new cover in time. Of course, it takes more than a few AP mines to kill a Hive Tyrant. Aside from shredding its wings, all they really seemed to do was piss it off. The Tyrant let out another of its piercing shrieks as it reversed direction, and started pelting back up the hill after Gravis. Twitch and Amy watched it go, then realized they had a bit of a problem. Namely, that there was no longer much of a minefield between them and the wave of smaller Tyranids. The debate over what to do consisted of Amy and Twitch pointing in opposite directions, yelling "handle it" at each other, then splitting up. Twitch ran around dropping the last of his mines and spraying fire at the incoming gaunts. Amy sprinted up the hill after Gravis and the Flyrant, hip-firing her pulse rifle at the massive target until it crested the hill as she lost line of sight. When Amy reached the top of the hill, she found Sergeant Gravis carefully circling around the enraged Flyrant, while Doc and Tink shot it. Like the other 2 guardsmen, she sighted on the Tau marker thingy Spot was projecting on the Tyranid, and poured as much fire as she could. It was beginning to look like the 3 of them would be able to wear the creature down. And then Gravis botched one of his dodges. The Space Marine had to choose between trying to block the Flyrant's bone sword or dying a horrible death, and reluctantly chose the former. For the second time that day, he flew through the air with all the grace and aerodynamics of a thrown brick. Sergeant Gravis ricocheted off of one of the stone spires encircling the hilltop, briefly stumbled upwards, then crashed into the dirt directly behind Doc and Tink. He was a tough bastard, though. Within a second of his landing, he started moving again. Both the Space Marine and his power armor groaned as he struggled to get back on his feet. The Flyrant let out yet another roar, sighted on the recovering Space Marine, and charged.